Many years ago, I met a guy called Ray Campy, and he was really into rock and roll. He had his own rockabilly label in America, and we were talking about rock and roll one day, and I said to him, because the real trick is that rock and roll's dirt under the fingernails and maybe be a little bit risky. And he said, absolutely, it's all that.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about your career is that it's been rock and roll. It's not been anything other than people having a really good time and not pretentious.
That's right.
Was that something
Attitude. I mean, it's always been about attitude. Listen, I was 11 years of age. I went to see Elvis Presley in a film called Loving You. Prior to that, I went to see Rock Around the Clock and all that, but it didn't stir me like Elvis did. And I think we were just, there was thousands of us, you know, there was Cliff Richard, Marty Wilde, all the people from that time all wanted to be like Elvis. We walked around with a lip and an attitude, you know. Ever since then, you got people like Mickey Rourke in the films, and, you know, it's all been, that's rock and roll attitude, and nothing's changed. You're a rocker or you're not a rocker.
Yeah.
Some people say I'm off me rocker, but no, it's always been like that. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, and there's a lot of people. There's a big gang out there of us now, you know.
Oh, I wanted to ask you to clarify for me the sound, the rock and roll sound, because when
Our
rock and roll
sound.
went, yes, when it started, it was an accident, wasn't it, or something?
Well, yeah, it was. First of all, Rock and Roll Part 2 was the hit, which was the instrumental side, but we wrote Rock and Roll Part 1, and we needed a B-side, and we'd got no money. And actually, even that was an accident, because Mike Leander, who was writing some sort of MOR-type songs as well, as working with me, I'd got Elton John. Elton John used to come in and do sort of ballady type demo sessions.
Yes, they used to call him Fat Reg from Pinner, didn't they?
Well, there's something like that. Yes. And I used to do all the sort of heavier rock things. And Mike said to me, Elton cancelled out because he got a bad throat or something. And studio time is very valuable. If you've got studio time, you know, everybody runs for it. So Mike said, look, the only way you're ever going to get hit is if we start writing a song with audience participation, this kind of thing. And I said, well, I don't know how to write a song. And, you know, I've been recording for 12 years at that point. And we sat down, I was reading, I think, The Melody Maker, and it got the title Rock and Roll. And I thought, well, that's it. It's stupid. Why don't we just go right back to the beginning, write a song about... We wrote Rock and Roll Part 1 on that session. Then we went away and they said, well, we want a B-side. So we didn't have any money, so we remixed the A-side, and I put on the Hey Hey Heys and some hand claps to make it different from the other side. And that's how the sound came about. Brought the drums out front. But we'd been working for a couple of years beforehand, sort of experimenting. The two of us, Mike played all the instruments on that session. I did all the vocals. And we used to swap around. You know, I'd be in the engineering booth, and we had a guy called John Hudson, who was the engineer of Mayfair Sound. And I mean, that whole thing just developed from there on. Everybody was sort of saying, let's get the glitter sound. I think it was a little bit, looking on reflection, I think that we were both influenced, Mike and I were both influenced a bit from the sort of the 50s rock and roll, plus that kind of Gary U.S. Bonds, that kind of Spectre. So there's it's sort of 50s rock and roll with Spectre thrown in together.
Sure.
And that sums up the sound, I think.
Yeah, but there was never anything like that. That was a wonderful thing, because discos were just breaking all over the country.
Yeah.
And that sound was terrific in a discotheque as soon as it came on.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, it wasn't until after you'd introduced Rock and Roll Parts 1 and 2 that all the way across the Atlantic in America, they started to release about 10 years later on, 8 years later on, almost an instrumental version on the B-side as standard dance music practice.
That's
so
right.
you shaped that side of the Atlantic's thinking. Very interesting.
And funny enough, they're still doing it. I've just come back from Canada, and the ice hockey teams, which is like, ice hockey is almost... it's almost, you know, it's second to God there, if you know what I mean. Sure. And it's kind of every night, and they play Rock and Roll Part 2 every time somebody gets a goal, you know. And the other funny part about it is that in Britain we had this Ivor Novello Award, which is, you know, you stick it on the mantelpiece. It's the great songwriters award. And if you read the sheet music, it goes hey 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 ugh ugh shh grunt and a few other words which I won't mention today on it. It's been fabulous. It's like having a classic. writing a classic. And again, it was, Mike played all the drums and the guitar. Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck. I went to see Dire Straits yesterday. Mark was. They all sort of rave about the sound that we got with the guitar, and it was a cheap old guitar with a 5-watt amplifier with a valve in it, which we used to kick to make the damn thing, make it as growly as possible. And it was tuned to one chord because neither one of us could play proper chords. Or we couldn't play well enough, so we wanted this wall of sound type of sound. So the whole thing was just garage records, which I still prefer to this day. If we record today, I like to go into a studio that is that makes you hungry for a hit. Sometimes you can go into a studio and you see these places that are so plush, like the studio we're in at the moment, that you just want to fall asleep in. I like places that are a bit dirty. That's, again, dirt under the fingernail type studios, you're right.
I was in a studio like that a little while ago, and I was just talking to the guy, and it really was very scruffy. And I said, have you done much in here? He said, yeah. He said, Cliff had 3 hit albums here.
Great.
So it's interesting, isn't it, that like him, you have that feel for a place.
Yeah, it's very important that you do actually get that feel in a studio.
Now, one could be forgiven for thinking that it was just in England you had tremendous success.
Enormous.
But you were big all over. You sold millions of records in about 4 years. 18 million records, wasn't it?
At that time, I think it is. I think the last count was about 35 million records over a period of. It's actually our 20th anniversary as Gary Glitter this year.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I'm thrilled because you never know how long it's going to last. And to this day, the day that we're talking, my manager's renegotiating the biggest record deal of my lifetime. In fact, it's probably going to be the biggest deal I've ever going to sign. So that's great. I'm really thrilled, because for the last couple of years we've been a little bit out in the cold, and we've started our own label called Attitude Records, which has been doing quite nicely. But this is with a big major, which I never did have. In the 70s, Bell Records was a small independent label. And, the big majors used to get really uptight because here was a little record company. We had Rock and Roll Parts 1 and 2 was a hit in the United States, and so was I Didn't Know I Loved You Till I Saw You Rock and Roll. Then nothing came out. We've had hits by Joan Jett, who did Do You Want to Touch only a few years ago. Brownsville Station did Leader of the Gang, which was a hit for them, and left the Come On, Come On bit out, which was strange. But really, we haven't had that many records out in the States, and in fact, I've just come back from there, and the Greatest Hits is really doing very well there. They've just, all over again. So it's what I've always believed in. It's like there's no age to rock and roll. I'd hate it if I couldn't buy Chuck Berry or Little Richard or all the people that I grew up with. And I think it's the same with us now.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at the people that are around you, the musicians that come along, do you find them sadly lacking on that rich heritage that you and I had access to, those years of listening to Chuck Berry for the first time, maybe on Radio Luxembourg, where you could hardly hear it. Just get to the guitar break and suddenly he goes and disappeared. Do you miss that sort of?
Electric guitar, you didn't even know what they meant. The first guitar I got, thought you plugged it straight into the wall, and that was a sound that was so exciting. It was so incredibly fresh and new. But there was also youth culture, which nobody had ever seen before. I mean, today, youth culture is just a standard thing. Everybody, a pair of jeans but I mean, we couldn't even get a decent pair of jeans. You used to have to sew them up. Do you remember? I mean, there was no kind of youth. Everything, you were either a kid or you were old. You were pinstripe suits and that was it. There was no in between. But suddenly, and so we wanted our own music, and so it all came about because teenagers wanted this thing. Nowadays, you get the feeling that the marketing and the record companies and all that stuff sort of know that it's there and they're going to push it. And so, and again, there's nowhere for kids to play. I mean, we do Wembley and we do all the stadiums now. and so do the kids who've had one hit record, and they die on their arse because they've never had all those wonderful little village halls and those little places to play, and the Two Eyes Coffee Bar in Soho and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's no apprenticeship anymore. And half the time the kids can't play anyway, which is sad.
I tell you what is sad is when somebody samples maybe your drum sound
Yeah.
or maybe your guitar sound.
Yeah, well, it's a
and
bit.
then,
It's a lack of originality, but I don't know. This is a kind of a new. Maybe they're finding a new art in that too.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for it, but
yeah,
I don't think it should
it's not
steal
the same.
too much.
No. I mean, there's nothing like a drummer sitting behind a drum kit, whacking hell out of a skin. You can feel the physicalness of it. The same way as I don't like. There are certain acts which I won't mention, but go on stage and they actually mime. See, in a big stadium, people can't see properly whether they're miming or not. I walk out there and I say, "Oh, my throat's killing me tonight. But I'm here, and we do it this way," and they all go, "Ray!" because they know, and I know that every now and again there's that magical night when you reach a note that you've never reached before. You can't do that miming. And there's something happens. There's something. It's always different. I mean, people say to me, "Don't you get fed up with doing come on every night?" Or whatever. And no,
it's a
always
charge.
do it differently. It's a big. It happens for you.
Tell me, whose idea was it for the two drummers? Because that was very good.
What it was, Mike Leander played the drums. In fact, he started life as a drummer before he became an A&R man for Decca, and. Because we only use guitar, bass and drums on the record, he and I both devised this idea of using two arrangements of drums. And so when it came to doing it live, we put the Glitter Band together, who in fact did really well. And they had 8 hits of their own, 8 single hits of their own. And were a great backing band for years, but they were never on any of my records, apart from the Remember Me This Way live album.
Is that so?
Yeah. It was just Mike and I. We played on everything. And Mike played most of the instruments. I used to sit twiddling the knobs with John Hudson and saying, "No, let's try that bit. I like what you did before. That's better." And it was just a bit of trial and error. Between us, we did it all. It was easier than teaching a band, to do things that you were making up anyway as you went along.
Do you remember your appearance at the Palladium, was it in 74, on a Sunday night?
Yeah, I
Do you remember the staircase?
Oh, God. How could I forget it? See, I was rather partial to a drop of gin in those days. I always use a staircase, and I think this was the first time, and I thought, well, at the Palladium, I've got to come down there grand. I mean, I want to be ultra grand here. This is, it's always been a mixture. Gary Gliss has always been a larger-than-life character, even to me, because I see him like... he can wear the big shoulders and the platform shoes. He can be Superman. He can be Hollywood. He can be glitz, glam, the whole thing, And so we got this staircase from Pinewood Studios, and it just didn't quite fit in. The whole staircase we put onto the stage, but it had to be tilted slightly forward. Now, nobody had a chance to rehearse this. They hoisted me up the back of the staircase and perched me on the top, and I've got this sort of feather boa thing on me, and I always do. I'm the only artist I know in the world that comes on backwards. In other words, I stand at the top of the staircase and I always do my turn round with a shock surprise, just to check to see that there's anybody out there, And all the kids were screaming like mad. It was great. And I got this feather bow, and I got this kind of bit of feather stuck in my mouth, and I'm going, trying to blow the feather out. And I tottered on my platform shoes, and I nearly went, this great career nearly went, scurrying down these stairs. And the kids were screaming like mad, and I can hear it now. It's like unbelievable. This was the Palladium. This was like everybody wanted to play at the Palladium. When I was 10 and 11 years of age, Sunday Night at London Palladium was the most powerful television show, the most powerful theatre in the land. This was before all the stadiums and all that stuff. And the audience, the kids were screaming, and when my feet went, you could hear the screams get sucked back into their throat, and there was this like that, because they thought I was going to fall, and it pulled me around absolutely, and I don't know, it was just magic. I just floated through that show.
I've got to tell you, from where I was sitting, it looks as if you were in complete control.
You were there?
Yeah, I was
Well,
watching.
I was in control. I was.
I thought, it never crossed my mind you were going to slip down. I remember turning to a DJ I was working with at the time. I said, how does he do that? I can't manage that. Because they had these really high platforms on.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was totally outrageous. I mean, no one had seen anything like
nobody did it at all.
Yeah.
I'm, thinking back, I no wonder at it. I mean, I'm walking around like a cripple half the time with a bad back. I remember coming back from Norway in Scandinavia on a stretcher once because I did my back in, and I got the award for having the worst effect from the shoe company, major shoe companies. Oh no, the Achilles Award. That's it, the Achilles Award from the medical profession for having the worst effect on people's health, wearing these shoes. Which is quite amusing. And I see now that they're coming back into fashion again, which is quite amusing, really. But those of us in life, and there's probably a lot of us listening to this who've got short legs. Good, bring back the platform. It's all right for you. You're a long-legged, tall long-legged man, but we midgets of the world need these platforms.
Well, I was looking at a comic the other day, Judge Dredd.
Oh, yeah?
And I thought to this is true, I thought, I wonder if Gary Glitter had anything to do with Judge Dredd.
I think there may be a little bit of that, because that came around about the same sort of time. I'll tell you how I got it, really. I went to see a play, The Balcony, by Jean Genet, and it was set in a Parisian brothel, I suppose. And what they did was the madam had the clientele, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, come in and become the archbishop, the general, and whatever. And they stick them on these platforms, not actually platform shoes, but on these kind of platforms, which became like platform shoes, and gave them big shoulders and big costumes. And that sunk in my mind as seeing that and thinking, yeah, that's great. If you're playing a big place, it's great to make yourself look larger than life. It's Superman. It's all out of the comic strips, really.
Yeah. And strange enough, that magic is there straight away. As soon as you come on stage, everyone goes, oh, yes.
Thank you.
I know he's winding me up, but I also know he means it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my music, I'm pretty serious. I mean, serious about it as much as... See, if I could write lyrics like Bob Dylan or then I may have gone that way. But when you get a big hit with hey, 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 and you got to follow that, you figure, well, you better just stay in line with that. So everything became come on, hello, hello. Most of it was talking about me. And also, as a kid, I grew up with rock and roll as being fun. Most, the Purple People Eater and I'm Not a Juvenile Delinquent and stuff like that. Rock Around the Clock. This is all fun. I ain't nothing but a hound dog. It was always fun. And so that's really what I know, and that's what we do.
There's one thing I noticed. I never see pictures of Gary Glitter, and you see on the Sunday magazines, you always see somebody going to the supermarket. I never see Gary Glitter anywhere other than on the stage. It's very interesting that. I thought, it's a piece of magic. Did you deliberately plan that?
We are very selective with what we do. Even I must admit, I did. I have done the occasional commercial. I think the Heinz soup commercial was gone. But again, it always looks like I'm going on stage. That was said in the dressing room. We're just. It has to have a rock and roll attitude about it. Otherwise, I won't do it. Only because I believe in it. I live like that, and I don't want to... I've never liked this, I'm going to be an all-round entertainer one day and all that stuff, I mean, I am... I had one moment in my career when I was forced to sort of do cabaret and stuff like that. And I tell you what really cheesed me off was... I was reminded of it, it's funny enough, this morning, was that I'd got some fans that had come over from America or Scandinavia or somewhere, and they could not get in because they had to wear a tie. And from that day forward, I said, no way, ever, if anybody ever gets stopped for coming in because of the way they dress, this is crazy. How can I be dressed like I am and they stop my audience coming in like this? No way. You know, unfortunately, we are the rock and roll generation now. You know, we're in radio, television, writing, journalism, everything. So this world will change quite considerably.
Oh, yes.
And get rid of the old guard, that all the things that we rebelled against.
Yeah. There'll be nothing left to rebel against. You know what people are going to be demanding to wear bow ties soon?
Well, they want to go straight. There'll be real straight people around. But you get those anyway, you know.
I was going to ask you the thought of being somebody else in another age. Now, it's a wacky question, but if you could have been born in
Henry
another
VIII.
time, you'd like to be in Henry VIII?
Henry VIII. Yeah, I fancied Henry VIII. He had a good time with the ladies.
Yeah.
And when he got bored with them, he could chop their heads off. That was pretty good. Pretty chauvinistic at the day, but no, I think he had great costumes. He would, you know, it was a good time. Yeah, I quite liked that period.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And if you didn't live in this country, which other country do you think you'd feel most at home in?
It's strange, really, because every country I've ever been to has got something very special about it. I do love England very much, and Great Britain. Probably because I'm very spoilt here. The public are, you know, everywhere I go, everybody's, go on, Gary, because they've seen me through thick and thin, all sorts of kind of things, and it's like a big pat on the back. I was in Canada last week, and most people, a lot of people there know me, but it's not quite the same. The minute I came home, I could feel that warmth. I like Australia very much. I like Scandinavia very much too. I like, I particularly Norway is a place that I found very hospitable, wonderful people.
Now, you spent some time in New Zealand with the Rocky Horror Show.
In New Zealand, yeah, New Zealand. See, I've actually been very fortunate. I've travelled a lot through this. It's a great job, you know. I recommend it to anybody listening.
There's a long queue to get it, believe me. What about that Rocky Horror Show? How did you
Rocky
feel
Horror
doing
Show, yeah. Strange the way it happened. One of those quirks of fate, really. I always had to think. I always used to think when I played the part of Frankenfurter, I'd be. I used to think of the hostess with the mostess and Shirley Bassey. I don't know why. I got it. I tell you what. There was a moment when everybody left the country because of tax problems. It was very hard. It was in 19, I think it was 70, 76, 77, that sort of time. And I remember having lunch with Rod Stewart, and Rod said, look, I'm going to have to live in America, because we were paying, 87% in the pound, and anybody who, it was only just before that for 12 years I was starving, but suddenly I was a rich man, and I got broke, and I'd got 2 children from my first marriage, so I didn't really want to go to the States, and it wasn't really happening as big as Europe for me at that time. So I went to live in Paris. And I did all the things that a sort of an 18-year-old boy would do, except I was probably at that point closer to about 30 years of age, 32 years of age, last week really. And
as much as that.
at least. And I sort of played around and had a good time there. And then I got bored really, and somebody from my management company sent me a script of the Rocky Horror Show. And I'd seen it prior to that in the King's Road. I think that was must have been about 76, I think it came out.
That was
75.
years that ran there, didn't it?
Yeah, it was wonderful, with Tim Curry, who really was the best Frankfurter ever. And I read the script, and the opening line in the script is, unlock a mind, unmind a lock, it's the same as the beginning of the end, do you follow? And I thought, oh yeah, I really follow that, So I looked, and then they wanted to know whether I would do it. Now that afternoon, I walked down the Champs-Élysées, and there was a film, Shirley MacLaine and Anne Bancroft, called Turning Point. And I thought, Turning Point, maybe this is an omen, I better look again at this script. Maybe it's time I did think of doing something else. And I was pretty bored in Paris. Well, you could only eat so much and, you know, and go club it and go around the art galleries. And, you know, I was missing England anyway. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll look in the paper and see if this Rocky Horror Show is played anywhere. And there it was. It was being played in a small cinema just up off the Avenue Wagram, where I was living. And they started at midnight after a Fellini film. And the Fellini lot came out. And the Rocky Horror lot were queuing to go in. And there they were with green hair and blue hair and, you know, punked up and everything. I mean, this was really early punk. It was late 70s, early punk and all. And these were French kids, and they were all. Now I took the script along with me because I thought, well, I'm gonna read off the script and check what's going on and see if I can get into this. And all the kids in the audience knew their parts and were identifying with the parts that they identified with the Rocky Horror. I knew this was going to be a cult thing, and I came back to the flat and I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I got on a plane the next day and went off to New Zealand, and we did 3 months of it. And it was great. It was so thrilling to do. I won the Best Legs Award in New Zealand.
I wasn't going to mention
I
that.
mean, that, you know, they may be short,
But they're beautiful.
very shapely.